Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
On Christmas morning, the house smelled of cinnamon rolls, fresh coffee, and pine needles, the kind of scent that usually carried a promise of warmth and comfort. But that morning it wrapped itself around me like a suffocating blanket, reminding me of every slight I had swallowed in silence. My mother stood in the center of the living room with a red velvet box in her hand, her eyes sparkling as if she were about to hand down the crown jewels. She walked right past me, right past the pile of modestly wrapped gifts under the tree that I had brought, and stopped in front of my sister, Lily, who sat cross-legged on the carpet in a designer sweater that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. Mom cleared her throat theatrically, making sure every eye in the room was on her, then placed the box in Lily's hands with a little nod of reverence. "You've earned this," she said, in that syrupy tone that dripped with admiration. Lily's perfectly manicured fingers tugged at the ribbon, and when she lifted the lid, a shiny silver house key glinted against the velvet. Mom clasped her hands together as if she had orchestrated the second coming. "She deserves it more," she added, her voice carrying across the room like a verdict. I smiled. At least, I arranged my face into something that resembled one. Inside, the words carved themselves into my ribs. She deserves it more. More than who? More than me, the daughter who had quietly paid her own bills, scraped through college without a dime of help, and never once asked for a bailout. Lily squealed and threw her arms around Mom, already asking whether the guest bathroom had marble counters or just quartz, and everyone laughed, even Dad, though his laugh was more distracted, like he knew there was a script he was supposed to follow. I stayed in my corner of the couch, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee, watching the scene unfold as if I were an extra in my own family. I'd gotten used to that role over the years, the forgotten one, the filler child, the girl who never needed much because she had learned to survive on little. But this morning was different. This morning I wasn't just watching. I was waiting. My own gift sat under the tree, small and thin, wrapped in plain white paper. No bows, no glitter, just enough to pass as an afterthought. Mom didn't even announce it. She brushed past it, directing Lily to open the oversized boxes stacked on her side of the tree, each one filled with clothes and electronics. I could have laughed at the absurdity of it, but my throat was tight with something darker, a mix of rage and anticipation. Finally, after the mountain of wrapping paper settled around Lily like a throne of trash, Mom nudged my little package forward with her slipper. "Here," she said, her tone flat, like she was tossing a receipt into my hand. I didn't move. Dad reached for it instead, curiosity flickering across his face. "I'll open it," he said, perhaps expecting that at least one gift in the room might surprise him. He tore the paper, careless, like it didn't matter, and pulled out the envelope. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might echo against the walls. He slid a single sheet of paper from inside, unfolded it, and his eyes began to move left to right. I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. The smile that had been plastered there all morning faltered, then froze, then collapsed altogether. He blinked once, twice, his fingers trembling against the edge of the page. Nobody else noticed at first. Lily was still gushing about the kitchen island she was already imagining, Mom basking in the glow of her own generosity. But I saw it, the way Dad's knuckles whitened, the way the color drained from his cheeks, the way his lips parted but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just been caught stepping into the wrong room at the wrong time, exposed without warning. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence stretching between us was louder than anything I could have spoken. My coffee had gone cold in my hands, but I held onto it, steady, as if to remind myself not to break character. Finally, Mom's voice cut in. "What is it, honey?" she asked, still half laughing, oblivious. Dad folded the page halfway, shielding it from her eyes, and shook his head. "Nothing," he muttered, though his voice cracked in a way that made the room still. Lily tilted her head, confused, her shiny new key dangling between her fingers. I leaned back into the couch cushion, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth, not wide enough to be obvious, but strong enough for me to feel it burning there. I had waited for this exact moment, for the weight of one single page to shift the air in the room, to wipe that smug glow from every face that had looked past me all my life. The laughter died down. The crinkle of wrapping paper no longer sounded festive but harsh, intrusive. Everyone turned to Dad, waiting for an explanation, and he sat frozen, the page shaking in his hands. He couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. And that was the moment the room went silent, the kind of silence you feel in your bones, the kind that makes you wonder if the walls themselves are listening. Dad's eyes stayed locked on me, and I didn't blink. Because he knew. He knew exactly why that page had been slipped into his Christmas morning. The silence that settled after Dad read the page did not vanish so much as shift rooms and switch outfits, because while everyone resumed the choreography of Christmas with exaggerated cheerfulness, I could feel the quiet stalking us from the edges like a draft under an old door, and it carried with it not only the words on that page, but years of smaller scenes that had rehearsed this one without anyone naming it. The kind of scenes other people dismiss as family quirks until they add up to something heavier than truth. I remembered grade school science fair nights where my paper volcano bubbled on a folding table while Mom dragged our neighbors to coo over Lily's poster board, which she had designed, by pointing at a Pinterest photo and handing me the glue gun. I remembered high school mornings when college brochures arrived with my name on them and somehow slid into the recycling bin under the coupons, while Dad drove Lily to her private coach because a mediocre tennis backhand had been repackaged as destiny. I remembered filling out financial aid forms on a cracked laptop at a public library because the home Wi-Fi password had been changed without telling me after I had the nerve to ask if we could rotate chores. And then coming home to find a bow on Lily's door and a handwritten note that said, "Princess parking only," as if that was cute and not the truest mission statement this house had ever produced. The favorites game did not stay in childhood. It just changed billing codes. When my car's transmission died during my junior year, I picked up extra shifts and sold the car for parts, while a week later Lily posted a boomerang of keys to a starter SUV paid for with what Mom called a family decision, and when I finally signed a lease on a tiny apartment that smelled like old lemons and freedom, I carried up the mattress myself and celebrated with a rotisserie chicken on the floor, while the same afternoon Dad nodded solemnly through paperwork to co-sign Lily's first condo because, as he put it, interest rates were low and she shouldn't be punished for not being as stubborn as you. It would be funny if it were a sitcom, and sometimes I try to tell it that way because the laugh track keeps the grief from sticking in my throat. But the truth is I learned to stay quiet not because I agreed, but because talking had the same effect as defrosting the freezer door with a hairdryer, a lot of buzzing and steam, and then the same block of ice creaking back into place. So when Mom minted Lily as homeowner with that shiny key and the line, "She deserves it more," I did not feel surprised so much as relieved that the story had finally stopped pretending it was anything else, and I let the relief turn into something I could hold. Something like a handle on a very heavy suitcase, because I had no interest in begging for the scraps of fairness when it had never once arrived warm. Dad, still holding the page he had torn from my envelope, kept trying to find a place to set it that did not exist, lifting a magazine, checking the coffee table, almost sliding it back into the thin white sleeve as if the paper itself might behave if tucked away, and I watched him because the only thing he has ever hated more than confrontation is paper with numbers on it that do not blink first. I poured more coffee, let the cinnamon smell do its best, and then I stood and said, in the same tone we use for grace because ritual is a useful costume, that I wanted to make a toast to Lily's new house, to the brave little key, and to our parents' generosity, which had surely been measured twice and cut exactly once because only fools go into big commitments without understanding the way the interest rate resets in spring or how an association board can be a real pain in the butt about unregistered occupants, or how a balloon payment is not a party, and while I said it, I kept my eyes on Dad's hands, which had begun to fold and refold the page until the middle seam threatened to split. Lily giggled in the bright, careless way people do when they are used to applause rising no matter what sound they make, and Mom laughed along. But it was the laugh she does when she thinks the waiter has brought the check to the wrong table, and she is half a second from pushing it away. It would have been easy to let the moment slide back into wrapping paper and sugar glaze, to collect my plate and head for the sink while everyone regained their balance, but the day did not owe them balance. And I did not owe them the muscle work of making this house feel like a trampoline again, so I raised my phone, snapped a cheerful photo of Lily lifting her new key against the twinkle lights, and said we should get a jump on the new year since homeowners are busy people. That I would handle it as a gift, because my schedule is flexible and I love a theme night, that I would send the family group our plan for a New Year's Eve potluck at Lily's place with a tour of her new kitchen, and before Mom could finish the sentence that started with, "Maybe we should wait until," I wrote the message out loud as I typed it, added a line about how nice it would be for the cousins to bring their kids to see the neighborhood pond and the walking trail, threw in 3 exclamation points for the sake of theater, and hit send so the little gray bubbles could do what sermons never do, which is force everyone to live with a decision in writing. The phones around the room began to buzz like a hive somebody had nudged with a broom handle, replies blooming from aunts and uncles, and a neighbor who somehow still sits in that chat because Mom likes to loop the community in. And the congratulations rolled in with casserole assignments and offers of extra folding chairs, which meant the party had shifted from hypothetical to pinned on calendars that are not easily erased. And when Lily looked at me with a smile that did not quite know where to land, I smiled back, because sometimes revenge is not a hammer or a match, but a polite RSVP that leaves no door for backpedaling. Dad lowered the page slowly, the crease now a pale scar across the middle, and pressed his lips together in the way he used to when the cable bill came with late fees, and I thought about the thin line between generosity and leverage, about how keys can open and lock in the same motion, about how a housewarming can feel very chilly if the heat isn't on because someone forgot to check the fine print. Mom said we should talk details later, which is code for finding a rug big enough to shove a refrigerator under, while I topped off everyone's coffee and set the cinnamon rolls on a platter like a waitress who knows more about the specials than the chef. And when Lily asked in a bright, brittle voice whether I could help her pick paint colors next week because she wanted something calming but coastal, I told her of course, because help is a kindness and also a mirror when you hold it right. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a notification I had been expecting, a little ping that had nothing to do with potlucks and everything to do with whether people who say, "She deserves it more," understand that houses not only have doors but also records. And I glanced at the screen without taking it out, felt the small confirmation light up my palm, and let the smallest smile reach my eyes as I looked back at Dad, whose gaze had drifted to the tree like the needles might offer instructions. Lily slipped the key onto a chain around her neck and lifted it like a charm from a catalog, and Mom started describing a backsplash she'd seen on a home show as if cameras were already rolling, but the only show I cared about had already started on my phone. And the next episode would not wait for them to catch up, because the countdown to our New Year tour had already been posted. The cousins had already volunteered to bring kids and noise. The neighbor had already promised to post photos too. The community page for visibility, and the message sitting at the top of my notifications had already been scheduled for delivery if anyone tried to call this off. "What did you do?" Lily whispered with a nervous little laugh that thought it was still safe, and I let the question hang between us like mistletoe no one wanted to stand under, because some gifts are not meant to be guessed, they are meant to be lived through. The days between Christmas and the New Year moved with that heavy, post-holiday sluggishness that makes even simple errands feel like you are wading through honey, yet underneath the slow surface I worked with a precision that would have made my old boss in compliance proud. Because if a family insists on acting like a corporation with preferred shares and an informal board, the only language it listens to is paperwork spoken clearly and delivered on time, and I had learned, painfully and thoroughly, to sound fluent. While Mom posted photos of Lily's key framed against bouquet lights and an inspirational caption about fresh starts, I opened my laptop at my tiny kitchen table and began to weave the smaller threads that would tighten at exactly the right moment. Starting with the public records every homeowner forgets are public until they do not want them to be, then the homeowner association bylaws that look harmless until you read the enforcement section with a cup of black coffee and a pen, then the utility onboarding portals that insist on verifying identity of recorded owners before they will schedule anything more complicated than a meter read. It was not that I wanted to sabotage my sister's housewarming. I wanted a housewarming that matched the truth on the deed, and if the truth turned out to be slightly less Instagrammable than a bronze key on a ribbon, that was not my fault. Because I had not purchased a bow tie around someone else's narrative, I had purchased a bag of ice and an oven thermometer and the right to say the temperature was what it was. I requested an HA estoppel letter, the form every title company begs for during closings and every board secretary resents on a holiday week, because while Lily had a key, she did not yet have a resident sticker for the community gate or the little RFID tag that tells the trash service where to stop, and that letter, issued as a matter of routine, would go to the owner of record on file with all listed emails copied, which included the one my mother uses to send recipes and the one my father uses to forward newsletters about golf courses he never plays, and that single paragraph with its tidy balance column would ask whether any outstanding violations needed to be cleared before the unit could be occupied by an unregistered adult relative, which is the sort of phrasing that seems polite until it lands in a family that prefers to pretend rules are decorative. I scheduled the utility inspections the way any helpful sibling would, and I did it with Lily on speaker so that every step sounded like support rather than strategy, explaining that in older buildings you always want the electric company to perform a load check because nobody enjoys a tripped breaker in the middle of a party, and she chirped yes, yes, you're so good at this, and told me to pick any time, and I did, though the system cheerfully explained that appointments cannot be confirmed unless the applicant's name matches the accountable party on the recorded title. And when I read that line out loud, she laughed again and said just use mom's email, which I did, because kindness can be sharp if you hold it right. Next, I drafted a friendly homeowner orientation request to the association manager, the kind that mentions paint colors and mailbox keys and parking decals, because I wanted the roster updated before the cousins pulled up with casseroles and strollers. And in that message, I asked two simple questions that would require answers in writing: whether an overnight guest limit applied during extended renovations and whether a second set of keys could be issued for an adult occupant who was not listed on the deed. Then I closed the laptop and went for a walk around my block, where someone had strung candy canes along a chain-link fence like a budget parade that still made me smile. Dad called that evening with a tone I know far too well, a fatherly drawl soaked in false calm like a paper towel dipped in too much cleaner, and asked whether I would consider pushing the potluck to later in January because schedules are tight and the weather looks iffy and he thinks Lily has a lot on her plate, and I told him weather in this town is never the problem, people are, and that I would be bringing folding chairs and insulated coffee dispensers and a playlist that kept the little ones from melting down, so we were covered. Then I said I had already ordered a pack of those peel-and-stick cabinet bumpers because nothing ruins a kitchen faster than slamming doors. And he went quiet in the way men go quiet when they are standing in a hallway holding a secret that gnaws through drywall. The next morning, Mom texted something chirpy about themes for the dessert table, which she followed with a second bubble that said we should avoid inviting the neighbors because parking is a mess, which came a beat before the HOA manager's reply to all that began, per our records. The owner of record is Mr. Daniel Carter, and continued in the sing-song cadence of bureaucracy that never blinks. And I watched the bubble stop as if somebody had leaned too hard on the pause button. Humor helps in moments like this, because otherwise the anger hardens and sticks, so I narrated my errands aloud like a cooking show while I drove to pick up disposable ramekins and a label maker for crockpots, telling the invisible audience that you always want to batch your paperwork with your shopping because it keeps your budget and your pulse steady. And I let myself enjoy the absurdity that it took a community association to say out loud what every holiday photo had hidden: that generosity is not always what it looks like when a parent's thumb rests on the scale, and that a key means very little when the lock belongs to someone else's ledger. That afternoon, Lily sent me a selfie of paint swatches fanned against a wall that, unfortunately for the wall, would not be hers to paint without an approval form. And I told her the gray beige looked restful and that I had reserved the building's freight elevator for the morning after the party to make cleanup easy, which she thanked me for profusely because gratitude feels safe when it believes it is winning. By dusk, the confirmations had piled up in a tidy digital stack, and I folded them into a shared folder titled Housewarming Logistics, because transparency is a fine habit to model. then I scheduled one final delivery that did not require a truck. Only a clock, an automated message to the family group that would go out at noon on the morning of New Year's Eve, linking to the association's welcome packet and the county's searchable property database with the parcel number pre-filled, plus a cheerful note reminding everyone to bring a dish and a government-issued ID for the gate, and a postscript about how moving can be complicated but truth makes it simpler. I set my phone on the table, exhaled for what felt like the first time all week, and allowed myself a small, quiet thought that was not gloating, just relief, that maybe this year we would stop pretending, and then, at exactly 12:01 the next day, my screen lit with a reply from Dad, a single sentence so sharp it could cut. Fruit, where did you get all of this? When New Year's Eve finally arrived, the air inside Lily's new home felt heavy even before a single guest stepped through the door. Because beneath the garland draped across the mantel and the cheap champagne chilling in the fridge was the knowledge that every casserole and every smile belonged to a gathering hosted in a space that did not legally belong to her, and while she moved around with forced cheer, adjusting trays and fussing over centerpieces, her movements betrayed the nervous awareness that eyes would soon search for proof of ownership and find only borrowed gloss. I arrived early, as promised, carrying folding chairs in one hand and a box of labeled ramekins in the other, looking every bit the dutiful sibling. Though the weight in my chest was not from the chairs, but from the quiet confirmation that everything I had set in motion was now humming invisibly beneath the walls like wires waiting to spark. Dad met me at the door with a practiced smile that barely clung to his face, and though his handshake was firm enough to fool a stranger, I could feel the tremor in his grip. The slight hesitation of a man who knew the ground had shifted and could not decide whether to bluff or bow. Mom swept in behind him, too loud in her welcome, her voice rising and falling with unnatural pitch as though volume could plaster over cracks, and she thanked me for helping with the logistics, the word hanging in the air like a warning, as if help had become a synonym for sabotage. I simply nodded, set the chairs by the wall, and asked whether the trash schedule had been sorted with the association yet, a question so harmless in form yet barbed enough in meaning to make Dad's mouth twitch. The cousins arrived in a cluster, children spilling through the hallway with coats dragging on the floor, and soon the table was covered with lasagna, casseroles, pies, and the noisy laughter of people who had no idea they were standing inside a contested stage. Lily tried to lead a grand tour, pointing out fixtures and appliances, her key glinting on a necklace chain as though the metal itself could shield her from questions, but when she gestured toward the balcony and bragged about plans to add outdoor furniture, one uncle casually asked whether the association permitted modifications, and the way her eyes darted to Mom, and then away again, told everyone more than any answer could. I stayed quiet during most of the chatter, spooning food onto plates, smiling at the children, nodding at jokes, while inside I counted down to the moment that had been timed with precision. The moment when the scheduled message I had prepared would land in the family group chat like a stone dropped into still water. It came just after the toast to fresh starts, when glasses clinked and champagne fizzed, phones vibrated nearly in unison, screens lighting up with the HOA packet and the property records I had queued. Cheerful links wrapped in the polite phrasing of an invitation. Cousins leaned over to show each other, brows furrowing, murmurs rising, and suddenly the room was no longer just a party but a courtroom, with Lily clutching her glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Dad set his champagne down without drinking, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on me in a look that was not fury but something heavier, the recognition that secrets, once surfaced, cannot be drowned again. Mom began gathering plates that were not finished, her hands moving too fast, the clatter of forks and china breaking the rhythm of conversation, and she muttered about how people should not trust everything they read online. Though the packet clearly bore the seal of the very community she had boasted about only days earlier. The children sensed the shift and grew restless, tugging at sleeves, asking to go outside, and one of the uncles tried to lighten the mood with a joke about surprise tenants, but even his laugh was strained. I finally raised my glass and said that transparency was the best foundation for any home, and though the words were dressed as a toast, Everyone in the room heard the undercurrent, because Dad flinched slightly as if struck, and Lily lowered her head, the chain with the key slipping into her collar. There was no shouting, no dramatic collapse, only the slow spreading awareness that something sacred had been fractured, that favoritism once whispered in corners had now been etched into public record, and that the page Dad had read on Christmas was no isolated strike, but part of a larger current that was pulling this family out to sea. The rest of the evening limped along, voices subdued, laughter forced, food eaten mechanically, and though guests stayed out of politeness, they no longer lingered in admiration of Lily's home, but instead exchanged knowing glances that spoke of caution and pity. When the final casserole dish was packed and the last child bundled into a car seat, the house sat in uneasy quiet, the decorations suddenly garish, the champagne bottles sweating in silence. Dad stood in the doorway, staring out at the night as though it held answers, and Mom busied herself in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes that were already clean. Lily approached me then, her voice low, not pleading but brittle, and she asked what I wanted, as if the exposure had been a negotiation instead of a revelation. I looked at her for a long moment, long enough for her to squirm, and I told her I had already taken what I wanted, which was the truth laid bare where no one could pretend not to see it. Her face crumpled, not in tears, but in something worse, recognition that the applause she had always counted on would not return so easily, that keys do not open doors when the walls themselves no longer stand firm. As I left, I glanced back at Dad still holding that folded page, the same page that had first frozen his smile, now worn soft at the creases like a prayer someone reads over and over. And though no one spoke it aloud, everyone in that house knew that the real story had only just begun, because truth has a way of echoing long after the music stops, and the echoes were only getting louder. By the morning after the party, the decorations looked like a hangover that had grown arms. The garland wilted and the empty bottles huddled on the counter like they were ashamed to be seen in daylight. And while Mom texted good morning platitudes followed by an accidental half-sentence about getting ahead of the narrative that she quickly deleted, I brewed coffee strong enough to sand paint and laid out the little stack of confirmations I had collected. Not because I planned to beat anyone over the head with paper, but because nothing sobers a room like the sound of terms and conditions being read out loud. I let the phone ring twice when Dad called. I let it ring a third time so he could feel what waiting costs. Then I answered with the same voice I used to use with cranky clients, pleasant and edged. And he launched into a monologue about misunderstandings and timing and how families should not make each other look small in public spaces, and I told him that public spaces had never been our issue, private decisions had, and that the cousins bringing spinach dip was not the reason the deed looked the way it looked. He asked if we could meet somewhere neutral, as though a house with his name on it and my sister's key in it had achieved some new diplomatic status. And I said the old diner off Route 17 would do because the coffee is terrible and the booths are narrow and no one performs well when they are physically uncomfortable. He arrived with the face he keeps for insurance adjusters, polite and weary, and set the folded page between the salt and the sugar like a hostage he was hoping to exchange. And the waitress topped our cups with coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the last administration, and for a minute we stared at the laminate tabletop as though it might give us instructions. He asked me quietly now what exactly I had given him on Christmas morning, because he had reread it a dozen times and every pass made it feel louder. And I told him that a single page can hold more gravity than a book when it prints what people swear will never be printed, and that the lines he found the most painful were not even the numbers, but the subject line, which was the title of the escrow email from the summer you told Mom and Lily to pick tile samples, a subject line that began, "Delayed funding release, revised disbursement summary," the summary that showed the condo wire was not a gift from savings, as advertised, but a draw from a credit line secured against the house we grew up in and a sweep from an account labeled with my name from a decade ago when college funds were still something we pretended existed, and that the last paragraph, the kicker, noted the title company's request that the borrower refrain from creating an unrecorded occupancy arrangement with a non-owner while the lien seasoned, because regulators have become fussy about paper that does not match the furniture. He closed his eyes like a man trying to reposition a heavy memory, then said he had planned to fix it, that the condo would be transferred when things settled, that I had forced his hand in front of people who do not understand how families make do. And I told him I understood how families make do better than anyone at that table because I was the do that had been made for years, and that the point was not to humiliate him, but to move the truth into daylight where it could not be gaslit into. A new color. He asked what I wanted, the real ask beneath the ask, and I said I had already taken my first piece, which was the story put back into the correct order, but since we were settling accounts we could talk about the rest. And I slid a second page across the table, not a threat, not a lawsuit, not a demand letter filled with adjectives, but a simple, notarized agreement drafted with a friend who writes very plain English for a living, an agreement that did 3 things in 3 sentences. Acknowledge the sweep from the account tied to my name and the lien used to finance Lily's unit, committed to record, within 30 days, a transfer of title of the small rental bungalow Grandma left and that had been sitting unrented for taxes, to me alone as equalization, and established that any occupancy of the condo before its title matched its tinny key would be treated as a rental under fair market rent paid by the occupant to the borrower until the transfer was complete. He read it, not blinking, and the waitress refilled our cups because she sensed an old ritual playing out, and I kept my voice steady while I told him copies existed in places that did not forget passwords. That if anyone tried to frame this as a tantrum, the copies would be delivered to dull people with badges who dislike creative financing. That the calendar on my phone had 3 alarms, one for the day the bungalow transfer should be recorded, one for the day past that when late fees start to make grown men cranky, and one for the hour the scheduled email would go out to the association and the cousins if anyone tried to move the story back into the dark. He did not shout, he did not even flinch, he simply asked if I was willing to let him make this right without burning the whole house down, and I told him houses are not my idol, fairness is. And that fire is a tool like any other when used to clear space for something that will not rot. We signed at the diner while the lunch crowd argued about football, and by afternoon I stood in front of the bungalow I had known mostly as a line item on holiday arguments, the little place with the crooked mailbox and the camellia bush that refuses to die. And I felt a steadiness that had nothing to do with triumph, and everything to do with having a floor that does not move under my feet when someone else changes their mind. Mom called at dusk with a voice made of thin ice, asking if we were all right, if we needed to reframe, and I told her reframing is for pictures, not deeds, and that she should tell Lily to hold on to the necklace for now because keys make nice souvenirs during transitional periods, and if the condo transfer happened as promised, then maybe she could wear a different chain next Christmas that actually matched the records. She made a small sound I could not place, somewhere between relief and loss, and she asked if I had to be so clinical, and I said no, but it keeps me from getting stupid, and being stupid has always been this family's favorite sport. That night I placed the signed accord in a drawer with the spare batteries and the warranties, because that is where tools belong, and I sat on the bungalow's porch with a cup of tea that did not taste like victory so much as oxygen. And I let myself think about how revenge, when done right, is not flames and speeches, but a quiet rebalancing where gravity remembers its job and everyone feels it in their knees. Lily texted a single sentence that did not ask for forgiveness and did not offer one either, only said she would be moving in with a friend for a while to let things breathe, and I stared at the words until they blurred. Because sometimes the hardest part of winning is realizing the other person had never been equipped to play a fair game in the first place. I do not know what this family will look like next December, whether we will meet under the same roof with the same plates or whether holidays will become 2 smaller, lonelier tables, and I cannot tell you if Dad will resent me or thank me once he sees the numbers stop bleeding, and I am not naive enough to think paper alone can fix a heart that was trained to love unevenly. But I do know this. A single page can stop a lie from multiplying. A second page can redirect the road beneath your feet, and the rest of the story will have to be written by people who decide, finally, whether they want keys or truth.